including platinum-based alloy, cement, as well as the derivation of phase diagrams. As part of the alloy development work, she also worked with characterization techniques and as well as mechanical properties and corrosion. She was also the director of the African Material Science and Engineering Network, AMSEN, which was funded by the Carnegie Corporation of New York from 2009 to 2016. Prof. Cornish is currently supervising or co-supervising 12 postgraduate students, mainly at the University of the Witwatersrand, with 36 masters and 28 PhD students already graduated. She has lectured to all undergraduate years in metallurgical engineering since 1990. Her awards include some of the following: 6 Best Published Papers Award using electron microscopy by the Microscopic Society of Southern Africa. And she and her student had won award for presentation in the EMSA conference 8 times. She had 3 Material Science International Team Certificate, that was in 2006, 2007, and 2009, and won the Wits University Vice Chancellor's Teaching Award in 1998, and won the Supervisor Award for the Faculty of Built Environment, and recognition for her outstanding contribution to postgraduate supervision in 2015. I can continue and continue. She became the Fellow of the Royal Society of South Africa in 2010 and a Fellow of the South African Academy of Engineering in 2021. Prof, congratulations on that. And also she's won several ones, and she had a National Science and Technology Forum ESCOM Research Capacity Award in 2018. I can continue and continue and continue, but this is one of the things that I want to talk about. Prof had over 140 papers peer reviewed. Please, we are getting interference. Can we mute our mics, please? Thank you. And she has been a member of the Material Science International team. When she is not working, she enjoys traveling to places without cell phone coverage, and she's a very keen birder. She also is a keen photographer, especially of wildlife. On this note, Prof, I want to welcome you, and Prof, you have the floor. Thank you so much for honoring our invitation.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to put up my, if it will work, my picture. Then you can see I'm not a robot. And that's me. And that's I'm not there, that's a photograph, but I did take that photograph. Now I'm going to take it away again and hopefully get my presentation ready. Thank you for that nice introduction. And this is the bit I always battle with, because it seems to be different every time I try. Right, can you see it?
Yes, we can see it, Prof. Go ahead.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks a lot. Thank you and welcome, and for the chance to talk to you. And I hope this is going to be useful. So I was given the first title and I put the subtitle down myself. Now, formally, there's a contract between the student and the supervisor. There's also one between the university and the student. And there's also between the university and the supervisor. And what's nice is that there's standing orders on higher degrees of the university, and these are regularly reviewed. Okay, so that's nice because people are looking at them. So there's various people looking at them to check that everything is still in place. Now, contracts are good because everybody knows where they are and what is expected. Okay, and although you might think, oh, I don't want something formally, it's actually quite good. And you should have signed something when you start. I want to get across that supervision is a joint effort. Now, what's happened is, and I don't know if this is why I was asked to do this, there's been a new statement of principles for postgraduate supervision last month. Okay, so this was quite good because it made me look at it properly. You only look at something properly if you have to work from it. if you just have to read it, you think, yeah, that's fine. It's a bit like the small print in an insurance contract. So what I've done is I've just copied that to show you it's real. And then I've shortened it and put it down here in bigger writing. So what you must do is, between the student and the supervisor, establish clear roles. And this is especially so if there's 2 or more supervisors, because sometimes you can get one supervisor who's not doing an awful lot and one who is, or you can get a situation, very rarely, where something falls between the cracks because the other supervisor, each supervisor thought the other one was doing it. Okay. So that's why you need to be, your supervisors need to know what's going on. You must agree to meet regularly. And of course, these days it's all online. And annually, there's 10 contact hours for honours. You can think of that, I mean, we don't have separate honours in engineering, but you can think of that as being for the research project. 15 contact hours for MSc by coursework and project, and 24 contact hours for MSc by research or a PhD. Okay, now what I've done here is I've copied down what they say up here, and then where I've got it in red, I've got something which I've added to it. So both supervisors and students should keep appointments and respond timeously, okay, to any email or something. And sometimes I get so overwhelmed with emails, or occasionally I get cut off and I don't get an email. So my private thing, and I say to my students, if I haven't responded within 24 hours, email me again. So what I do is I might just, if somebody sends me something, if it's something for me to read, I usually say, got it, thanks, I'll get to it where I can. Okay, what's also good is that you have informed the other parties of absences, leave, going for conferences or anything, okay? Just be upfront and tell people when you're not going to be around. And one thing which is really important to sort out first and not later is the ethics. Now, most of the time, we don't have to bother in the Faculty of Engineering and the built environment. Just occasionally we might have to if we're interviewing people. And ensure the paperworks are done. There's annual reports. If they're not done, we could get into trouble. And then the other thing which catches us out sometimes is amendment forms. If the supervisor has changed, we recently sadly lost one of our supervisors because she resigned, and we needed those amendment forms in place just in case something goes wrong later on, and that supervisor is now expected to do something, okay? And it doesn't get found out because it's that supervisor's left. And the other thing, oh, I spelled that wrong, the intention to submit. That's supposed to be done 3 months before. And I think faculty is tidying that up. So here's a load of stuff copied from the supervisor for the supervisor. And again, I've copied it out. So it's the same stuff, but I've just copied it out and shortened it. And then I've written my own comments or things in red. So guide the scope and the outline of the write-up. Provide guidance at the appropriate NQF level, autonomy and accountability. Now, MSCs, well, a 4th year honours is a lower level than a master's by coursework. A master's by research is a bit higher, and then a PhD is higher again. And obviously they are slightly different. So the student would be expected to do more at each higher level. And the other thing is be reasonably accessible to students. Though those of you who know me know that I used to, before COVID hit me, I used to go away and go bird watching. And if I'm doing that, it's only for 2 weeks or so a year, and I'm taking my camera with me. So I'm already over my luggage allowance. So I don't want to be taking your stuff or my computer with your stuff on me, but give me a break. Okay. So that's a bit of fun thing. And just to remind you that supervisors are entitled to leave as well. Okay. What else the supervisor should do is be prepared for the meetings with the student, including being up to date in the topics. Now that shouldn't be too difficult because the supervisor should be up to date in the topics. Once I got myself into a position where I was really out of my depth with a student. It started, the project started off about half my stuff and half somebody else's stuff. And the other supervisor was more senior to me and took the whole thing his way. This was quite a few years ago and I was quite junior and I was sort of scrabbling. And then what happened was the supervisor got sick and he actually died very shortly afterwards. And it wasn't a very good place to be because I was out of my depth because it was no longer what we agreed. So mostly that should be easy, but just occasionally it isn't. And I've made sure that I'm never going to be in that situation again. Right. The supervisor must expect written work and return it in 2 to 4 weeks. Okay. I've put that in red because I try and turn it around much quicker than that. Sometimes if I've been sick or been away or doing something else, but very rarely it has gone into that. But I try and do it before that. But just remember, that's when they're supposed to return it. I think that's an awful long time. Right. The supervisor is to provide advice on writing, referrals for language training, academic writing, etc. It says that detailed comments are not the supervisor's responsibility. But my comment on this is how are the students are going to learn if the supervisor doesn't give detailed comments? Now, there's a question on editors, and editors don't have the technical background. I co-supervised a student once, an archaeology student. It was great fun. And I was doing archaeometallurgy, which is something I've always fancied. Basically, what happened is that the student got an editor. So that meant the prose was very, very nice, but it didn't actually, it lost meaning. Okay. So I'm a bit suspicious of editors. We've got some sound going in the background. And it might help if people turn off their cameras because it helps bandwidth, please. Thanks. The supervisor will guide the student's work. The idea is to be mutually respectful, okay? Although the work is the responsibility of the student. And also to assist with the schedule. Now that schedule should be in the proposal. And this is one reason why the proposal really is important, because that lays out what's going to happen, okay? Also, to encourage the student to present the work externally, national and international, and assist in the publication of research articles. Normally in engineering, they are joint publications. In other places in the humanities, they're not. And also to assist with IP issues and ownership. That can be problematic in some cases, which I'll come back to. Advise on plagiarism. Now, you really don't want to get accused of plagiarism because you could lose your degree. And one of the not so nice things we have to do as professors is sit on student disciplinary sessions. And I sat on quite a few. Can somebody mute, please? I don't think it's coming from my side. Thanks. And they are not pleasant to be. I've sat on as a Senate representative, and they are not pleasant for the student or for the supervisor involved. So don't go there. There's plenty of stuff available on plagiarism, and it wouldn't surprise me if you've already had a talk on plagiarism. Just don't go there. Make sure that you reference everything that is not your work and you acknowledge it appropriately. And one of the things is to ensure the student is told in writing of inadequacy and show the criteria beforehand. Now, this comes back to the fact that, you know, providing advice on the writing, how do you do this unless you show the students? So I tend to give the students quite detailed, you know, comments on their writing. And the last one is actually very important. The supervisor must refuse to allow substandard work to be submitted. It's really important because it's all to do with standards. And don't worry if you're a student and you think your work should be able to be submitted, there's a way around that, okay? But that's the supervisor's responsibility to refuse to allow substandard work to be submitted. Okay, we've dealt with that. And on top of that, what I think the supervisor should do as well, and it's worthwhile you guys remembering, the supervisor often brings in the funds, the bursary, the tuition fees, and the running costs, okay? Now, I've had several fights with my colleagues. I think it's unethical to take on a student and not to have this result sorted out before, okay? Now, there are some students out there who are self-funded, or they're company funded. The self-funded ones have usually got money from somewhere else, from their university if they're coming to VITS. I think this is so important. And I've seen, they're not my students, but I've seen some supervisors take on students and they haven't got the funds. And then there's a fight. Then the supervisors are trying to find the funds. And if the funds aren't available, especially these days, because so many places have cut down, it can get quite unpleasant. And I think it's letting the student down. Okay, the supervisor should really guide the student to plan the work and the practical work that needs to be done, and either how to do it or to get somebody else to show how, you know, how it's done. Sometimes it's easier to get another student to show that, especially with COVID. To assist the student to present the work more widely, as well as the conference we've mentioned. What about seminars and some other papers? To help the student with research problems, that's sort of covered. Also, what isn't covered is to help the student with administration problems with their school and the faculty. Sometimes it's much easier to sort out if the supervisor gets involved. The student might still have to fill in forms and maybe pay some small amount, but it usually goes quicker if the supervisor gets involved. The other thing which is important, which you guys don't see, is choose the examiners or help choose the examiners. Now, what the supervisor should be doing is choosing the most appropriate examiners who are going to vet the work properly, okay? That's important because it gives the student a fair chance. And the other thing that's not mentioned there is to help with the corrections and check them when they come back from the examiners. Now, here's a bit of a moot point. Even if the supervisor leaves, the supervisor is expected to help the students finish. I've actually inherited a student after the supervisor left, and it's been quite a lot of work, but that's what normally happens. There might be reasons why it doesn't happen like that, but that's what normally happens. Okay, and then what is the student going to be doing? This is what I copied from the new document, and then I've just taken it out. Right, it is the student's full responsibility to do the research and to complete it under the guidance of the supervisor. If necessary, the student must undertake coursework and also catch up on missed lectures, okay? The student must work independently and ensure that the relevant literature has been accessed and reported. And the student should work in accordance with that that should be NQF level standard, not NRF. The student must make appointments to see the supervisors, could be plural, at mutually convenient times in advance. When I was, before COVID hit us, I didn't mind students just dropping in to see me, but they must realize I might have been dashing off to something in 5 minutes' time. Now, this one has given quite a lot of grief. Submit written work for discussion timeously. It's on there. It's on, you know, it's there formally. And I have had some students who bring their work with them and they expect me to read it and go through it sort of cold with them there and then. That is just totally unreasonable, because then it becomes a rush job. Unless it's something like, is the layout correct? Can I refer to this diagram here and then have it here? That's different, okay? Now, the quality of the work should be the responsibility of the student. And in that document, it says the student should not expect the supervisor to proofread the work. Now, I actually disagree with this, because I don't know how the students are going to learn unless somebody picks it apart and shows them, okay? An editor won't do that. The students' mates might or might not do that, but I disagree with that. So I think the supervisor should proofread the work. The student should heed the advice of the supervisor, but remember the student is responsible for the quality of the work. This one I think is important. Focus on the work and work diligently. Be responsible for the ethics, and agree to honor the agreements on co-authorship, copyright and intellectual properties. There are universities for, agreements for this. External projects can be tricky, and I've had a couple of things where they have been tricky, but in the end we've sorted them out. But if it is an external project, it helps if everybody agrees up front. Sometimes that doesn't happen, and that's when the problem comes in. Right, don't plagiarize and reference properly. Nobody wants to be hauled up in front of a disciplinary hearing. They are not nice. As I said, I've been there as a faculty rep to sort of help oversee the processes, and it is not nice. And the student should agree to work within the criteria of acceptability given by the supervisor. And another thing is, don't push the supervisor to allow underprepared work to be submitted. It really doesn't help. And the worst case is that it could be rejected out of hand. Now, if a master's or a PhD is submitted, it goes for examination and it's failed, that's the end of the line. It's very difficult, if not impossible, to get it back. If it goes for examination and it comes back with a total rewrite, that's what you must have to do. Okay, what else I think that the student should do above that? So work hard, not just work, but work hard. Notify any absences. It's fine to have absences. We're all human. And catch up if necessary. Read the literature. It sounds trivial, but it's not. Listen to the supervisor. If you disagree, discuss it, okay? The supervisor might not be 100% right, but discuss it. Don't just ignore what their supervisor said, and be open and upfront with your supervisor. The other thing is order consumables timeously. And another thing which I think is very important is tell the supervisor and the lab staff of any broken equipment, especially now when not all of us are going in so much, and write up the reports timeously. Right, this at the moment, I think is still true for engineering. If you're registered after 2013, and I think everybody is now because that's a long time ago, have to write at least 1 journal paper for a master's and 2 journal paper for a PhD, okay? Now that's good because it's good practice for you. The other thing is to do the corrections that your supervisor says. If you don't agree, talk to the supervisor. Or if they're being done electronically, use the comment button and start a conversation with the supervisor. Don't just ignore them. It can really irritate a supervisor, and they can get to the stage where they think, well, what's the point of me doing this? The student's not going to do anything. So if you do not agree, talk to the supervisor. You could be right, but talk to the supervisor. Now, this is an agreement for a student registered in chemical and metallurgical engineering. And again, I've taken out the salient points. So do not hold full-time employment. Okay, that's very important with this. Will inform the supervisors of any changes, and realize that you might be required to make a full or partial repayment of any award, including the interest. Now, that's not great to start off with that. And then if the school is paying for the bursary, you're only going to get your payments if your progress is satisfactory, okay? And if there's an annual report necessary, you must do it. Now, the new NRF bursary students, they will have to submit a report. Well, that's what we're being told. And this is back to the manuscript of one journal manuscript for a master's and 2 for a PhD, okay? And they say during the course of the degree. Sometimes it's nicer to do it afterwards, but if you can do it during, that's better, because then you're on top of it. The advantage of doing it afterwards is that you've got the feedback from the examiners, and a master's degree gets 2 examiners and a PhD gets 3, and that it is very valuable. It might feel like a pain to have to do that, but it is very valuable feedback. Right, so a warning. If you're receiving a bursary, there's usually obligations to work for the company afterwards, whoops, if they want you, if they've got room for you, and not to receive other funds beyond a certain amount. Don't go there, because you could end up losing both lots of funds, because each of them find out about the other and they both cut back. And then you're really up a creek without a paddle. And they're not allowed to spend time beyond a certain amount on other projects, okay? That's really to safeguard you and give you time to do the work that you need to do to get your master's or PhD. And if there's any changes, which there might be, tell your funders, be upfront. Okay, this looks at joint student supervisor responsibilities. Meet regularly, we've already given these times, but here they are again. So really for research masters and PhD, it's 24 hours in a whole year, okay? So that's roughly 2 hours a month. But it might not be regularly 2 hours a month. It might be lots at the start, a bit in the middle, and lots at the end. Okay, a joint responsibility would be a change of plan in the research. This is unusual, but it can happen. And one of them is the research is not working and you can't get out of a rut. This might be that your technique might not have been totally suitable and you didn't realize it until you started doing it, because maybe the equipment that you're using is not sensitive enough. Another thing that can happen is equipment breakdown, especially if it's an important piece of equipment and it breaks down and there's no way of either replacing it or repairing it, okay? And so you need a change of plan, and that's what both of you should do. Okay, conferences. Now what usually happens is the supervisor not usually pays from their funding, but the student must do their bit if they're going to go to a conference and do the work. This paper is, we've mentioned already, but what I want to say is make them good ones. Don't have rubbish ones. They will be on your CV. And the thing about writing good papers is that the better a paper is, providing it's in the right field, the more chance it has of being cited. And that's good as well, okay? Now, papers in Faculty of Engineering and the built environment are usually jointly by the student and the supervisors. And I always put the student's name first. If it's the first time that the work is being written up formally. If it's a review paper, that means it will be done several years later. I might put my name first because I've written it, okay? But the student would have had their name first on at least one other paper. So if it's a review paper and I'm putting together a whole load of work of a whole load of students, the easiest way to choose who goes first is to put me first, because if I've got 3 or 4 or even more students' names on there, which one do I put first? So I put me first. But I do make sure that the students' names are on the major papers where they report their work first, okay? And for this reporting, the reporting has been a bit fragmented recently, partly because there's an electronic system that doesn't work, and partly because for ChemMet we've had a bit of a change in people who have been working with us in faculty. But I tell the students if I'm going to submit a negative report, okay? In our faculty, it's not great because the electronic system doesn't always work. I've put does not work. And there's even a couple of weeks ago, there were some funnies that came out of it for one of my students. But I do tell the students if I'm going to submit a negative report. I think that's only fair. Okay, so what do students do if they've got problems? Number 1, talk to your supervisors. If that doesn't work, maybe talk to your fellow postgraduate students, because they've got different supervisors, and then go back and talk to your supervisors again. It's always best to talk to your supervisors first, so I deliberately got it in twice, okay? They might be able to tell you who to talk to if they can't sort it out. Talk to the postgraduate committee. If you're in the centre, there's still some AmSen students finishing off. Talk to the director, that's me at the moment. You can talk to the head of the school. You can talk to the assistant dean postgraduate. You can talk to the assistant dean research, okay? There are lots of people you can go to, but start off with your supervisors. If it's a problem about your supervisor, then you probably want to go there and then escalate it up. Please don't write to the, the head of the university. Don't write to the vice chancellor first without going through all this lot, because I'm sure it can get resolved. Okay, sometimes people really have a problem with their supervisors, okay? So they've really got a problem. They don't think their supervisor is particularly good. But I want you to remember some of these things. That supervisor has been through a PhD and survived. They supervised other students and most of them got through. They've usually raised the funds. They've usually published papers and probably reviewed for journals and conferences, okay? They've been involved with experimental work. They've normally been promoted more than once. So taking all that into account, the chances are that supervisor does know what it's doing, even though you might disagree with it. Now, a little bit of disagreement is fine, but you must do it in a respectful way, okay? Now, you might have a real problem with your supervisor, so it really is a muppet. Now, this is where I said there's a cop-out. If the supervisor says the student cannot submit the work because it's not ready yet, and the student really disagrees with this, the student has the right to submit their work without the supervisor's consent, because there is a consent form which the supervisor normally signs, okay? Now, this is a protection if the relations really break down completely, or the supervisor dies. We nearly had that, but we managed to get it through, okay, just before the supervisor did die. Or, and I know of one case with that, and it wasn't at this university, the supervisor absconds. It's a very rare occurrence. Now, what happens is these students usually fail. So that's a reason why you don't want to go there, okay? So even if you think you're having a rotten time with your supervisor, if you can't get through these, try to. If you can't, then you can go this route. But I really don't recommend it. Okay, what does happen, and this is just so you know about it, is as the student submits their work, the supervisor has to put in this form, okay? Talks about the supervision process. And this form is really only used if there's problems. So it's a sort of backup. Could something have been done better? So the supervision process is mentioned. And remember, this is put in by the supervisor. The student's ability is assessed. Conferences and publications are given. If there's joint publications, some estimate on who did the work. Were there any personal difficulties? Okay. So this is helping to back up the student in case of problems. Briefly assess the quality of the dissertation or thesis. The quality of the language and the presentation, the contribution to the field, and the assessment of the standard. Now, you might think this is a bit sort of big brothery, but it's actually there to protect both the student and the university and the supervisor. So if there's any problems there, the university might turn around and say, well, why the hell didn't you see the student more frequently? Okay. This is, if you've got this, it shows that the student's work was good enough to be published. So that's a plus mark if the examiners don't like the work. And this is also good because some students can have a rotten time, especially now with COVID. And the faculty is being a bit more lenient and allowing students to take longer. So this might sound bad, but it's actually good because it's another safety net for the student and the supervisor. Right, another big question is how long should, I'm assuming this is a research MSc or a PhD take. Tricky, okay? Technically, it's N+1 for full-time students or 2N+1 for part-time students. Now, the problem is the faculty doesn't very often define N, okay? And it's one of the reasons why is that it keeps changing. And the other is the faculty is and the university is very concerned with getting students through to get subsidy. Now, you might think, well, what's subsidy? That's money that the government gives to the university, and it depends on the number of students that the university has got and how quickly they get through within the recommended time. Now, I had a nasty experience at the end of 2016 when the faculty excluded part-time students, not just mine, who were registered then, and didn't exclude full-time students. And it was a real fight to get them back again. And then another thing that happened was the faculty wanted a 2-year PhD. And that was a real big fight because really you're not going to get good work if you try and do it in 2 years. Very, 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 very rarely. Okay, so that was a big fight and cost lots of time spent trying to sort that out. Now it's sensible again. Okay, but that should be why it is very important. I looked at this about 6 times and I'm still finding mistakes. Sorry. So why is it important not to run over time? You might get excluded. Okay. It looks bad if you take too long to finish the degree. Remember, it's going to be on your CV. Okay. Is the funding likely to last? Possibly not if you take too long. And will you have to pay back the funding if you take too long? And if you take too long, you might get excluded and then you might have to pay back the funding. If you're a part-time student and studying with your employers, which is what some people do, how patient are your employers going to be? What about their other needs? Now, what happens if you're doing work and you're part-time? It's a good idea to get your project to be something that your employers are really interested in. Then they'll help you, then they'll let you do some of it there, then they'll be a bit more lenient because it's helping them. But if you take too long, they might not be interested in that anymore. They might be interested in something else. and then they might not let you use their facilities, and that gets tricky. I've seen that happen, okay, when somebody's taken too long. The other thing is it's more difficult to make an impact if it takes too long, because somebody else might have written it up before you, okay? Another thing, and your impact has gone. So although I cover that down there, another, which is true, that somebody could publish it before you, because they've been working on it at another institution, hopefully, not at WITS, but you will have to keep upgrading your literature survey if it keeps going on and on and on, okay? So that should be enough incentive not to make you want to carry on too long. Informally, because a lot of this has been more formal, but informally, realize that relationships and ways of doing things between supervisors and students, they differ, okay? And the student-supervisor relationship is different between different students and different supervisors, and even the same supervisor might have different relationships with different students. That's just the way it is, the way the students are, okay? And one student, if they've got more than one supervisor, they might have different relationships with the two different supervisors. Bear that in mind, okay? Because it's a natural human thing. And I put this little r versus big R. A few years ago, there was a bit of a hoo-ha because students weren't supposed to have relationships, big R, so that was inferring sexual relationships with their supervisors. And I totally agree with that. But I would argue that you do have a relationship, but it's a little r, okay? So think of the little r versus the big R. You don't want to go to the big R. Okay, the other thing is that some supervisors are nicer to their students, okay? So you might think somebody's a fantastic supervisor because they're really nice to you. They tell you your work is fantastic, and that's really great. So you think you've got a nice supervisor, a good supervisor. But nice is not necessarily fair. And I've seen a few times as director of the Centre of Excellence in Strong Materials that supervisors try and be nice to their students and give them nice things, but it's not fair. And those students shouldn't really be having those things, and they can't give it to all their students. So then it gets nasty, okay? So a lot of supervisors do a lot for their students, even if they are crabby at times. I admit to being crabby at times. And I'd like you to think of it as tough love. You might not want to be told that your research is not so good, but it's better that your supervisor tells you rather than you fail, okay? So it's better that your supervisor tells you and you try and sort it out, rather than your supervisor says, yeah, this is really great. You should win 6 Nobel Prizes with this. Then you submit it and then you fail because it's actually garbage. So think of it as tough love. Your supervisor is trying to help you out by telling you it's not good work, and just run with it. Right. Then you might think, why should your supervisor help you? Well, then they can sleep at nights to stop worrying about you. Most of them are fairly decent people and they do care about you. They might be a bit crabby, but they do care about you. Your supervisor will help you so that you can help yourself to improve, to achieve, to learn, to develop. Their name is attached to yours, okay? So as you go through and get your degree, their name is attached to that. And you are probably working in their area and your work helps them. So if they can help you develop there, it's pushing their area boundaries, okay? And another thing is so that you can leave and get on with the rest of your life, okay? That's good, because although it's fun being a student, you don't want to be a student forever because you want to go out there and earn some more money and do something a bit different. Why should you help your supervisors? One is so that they can help you. If you do help them, you will probably progress more quickly. And if you do that, you should finish more quickly. The other reason is to give them space to help the other students. You might sort of think, yeah, you know, you've got You want the supervisor to do X, Y, and Z, read your work, get back really quickly. But most other supervisors have got lots of other students. They've also got commitments for lecturing undergraduates. So give them a little bit of space. If you help them to help you, then that gives you a little bit of space. If you're tutoring, it helps the school, and that helps the academics to have more time to interact with the students. And if you're tutoring, that also helps you, because explaining things makes you think and gives you confidence. You've also got a nice peer group identity. It also goes on your CV, which is also good. Okay. And there's a chance, I put a question mark there because it's different in different schools. You should be able to earn some money. Okay. And doing things on your CV is really, really important, because anybody who's going to be looking at your CV shouldn't just look at your academic stuff. What grades did you get? Did you finish timeously? They should also be looking at other stuff on your CV. Are you a well-rounded person? Because a well-rounded person who's doing other stuff is probably going to be a much more stable, resilient person than a nerd who is just looking at, just looking at one thing. Right, beyond the degree, and for those of you who are getting a bit restless, the presentation is coming to an end. You've finished. Now you can take on the world, okay? You might think, great, I never want to see that crummy supervisor muppet again. Okay, you might need a reference, and your supervisor knows your work better than most. So it's good manners to ask your old supervisor to be a reference. It's good manners, prepare them, because they might start thinking, oh, what can I say? And also, but they would expect to do it anyway, okay? And many future employers, value what the supervisor says, okay? So it's important, because remember, they know your work better than most. You might need a professional introduction. You might need some advice. You might need somebody to put in the word, okay? Now, this last bit is quite important. If you're going to carry on doing research, you might be working in the same area, so as your research degree, and you might be working in different areas, but you might want to at least work with your supervisor at least part of the time, okay? But there's a big but there. If you're staying in South Africa, you want to be seen as independent. For the NRF, this comes later, but it is later. The NRF has a system of rating researchers. I'm an NRF rated researcher. I'm a B researcher, which is pretty good. I'm not an A. I don't think I'm going to get there. I've got too many other commitments, but it's good to get there, okay? And one of the things you need to do to get there is to show that you're independent. So if you're only working with your old supervisor, that means you're not independent. And when one of my students becomes an academic, and quite often they say, oh, should we work on this? I say, yes, but you've got to work on other things as well, not with me, so that you can be seen to be independent, okay? That's really, really important. Okay, and then basically, good luck. Go out there and zap the world.
Thank you so much, Prof. Thank you so much, Prof. I think when you were talking, I remember what is called tough love. So I think that is just what I want to echo.
Yeah, we've been there.
And then you said sometimes the supervisor, the student would think this is great work, and then you realize it is garbage. By the way, I think that it's very important that we take some of this, all these things to heart, and see how we can work on it. But I quickly have a question. So now we'll be going to the questions Q&A session. So you have any questions you can ask. But I think that my colleague Nozuko is on the call. Somebody is talking about how or can students use Turnitin to check their work and rectify prior to submission. I think that
yes. Yeah, that's recommended. The way to do it keeps changing, but ask your supervisor. There is a way to do it. I'd have to look it up. and that is really, really recommended. It keeps changing that there has to be a Turnitin report. When there has to be a Turnitin report, obviously it's compulsory, but sometimes it falls away again. And remember, our system changed earlier this year. We went from Sakai to Awazi, but that thing is set up again, okay? And that is a really, really good idea to do, to use Turnitin. Now, you might not like the answer from it, because what it does is it compares similarities and it shows you where those similarities are coming from. And you're only supposed to have, I think it's between 15 and 20% similarity. So if you have higher, that's going to be a problem. So you need to do something about that. But if you've done your work properly, it shouldn't be a problem.
Yes, Prof. Okay, Prof. Okay, Nozuko, can you just quickly give us how we can do this on Ulwazi? And Nozuko, she's the faculty's person in charge of a lot of things, and I think that she can quickly talk to us in 2 to 3 minutes about how this can be done, because it has been set up for the various schools. So Nozuko, you have the floor, please.
Thank you and good afternoon, colleagues. For the Turnitin, every school has got a Turnitin site that is there for all the postgrad students. So you just need to find out who the postgrad coordinator is for your specific school, and they will be able to send you a link where you can self-enroll yourself, and you then can sort of run your report through the site. It then afterwards will give you a similarity percentage, like Prof was saying just now, and then you will be able to check and rework it, and then sort of run it again if there's a need to do that. And then there are two ways in which you can do it. First, you can submit your draft, and if you're happy with that, then you can submit your final report. But both ways, I mean, you are responsible to do that, and therefore you work with your supervisor, I think, because at the end of the day, they need to have a copy of that report. So yeah, that's all I can say about Turnitin. It's the sites are available for every school. You just need to find out from the postgrad coordinator, and it's a self-enrollment site, so you'll be able to do that. And if there are any questions, you can just contact either myself or Desmond, and we'll be able to help you. But yeah, thank you very much. And thanks, Prof, for such a lovely presentation.
Thank you so much, Prof. There are some questions in the chat box, so I think you can go for it. And then I see Prof. Genga's hand, and then after that, Prof. Genga can also come in. Prof, continue.
Okay, I think the first question that we haven't answered yet is students are scared of taking tutorials due to the long time it takes for them. They're only supposed to be they're not supposed to have too many hours working on tutorials, okay? And the NRF bursary students, there's a very strict thing to that they must adhere to get their bursaries. So they shouldn't be totally taken over by tutorials. So I don't think that should be a problem. And if it is a problem, they must either talk to the lecturer that they're doing the tutorials for, or the head of school, because it shouldn't be too overwhelming. Okay, it's not meant to be overwhelming. Sometimes what they do, if it is overwhelming, is they'll put more than one student on a course. So that's the way to tackle that one. What advice would I give to supervisor who doesn't have access to research funding as those in South Africa. Enoch, email me. There might be a way out of this. It is, if we're sitting in South Africa, it's very difficult. What you can do, I think you're at University of Namibia now, what you can do is you can see what funding they've got, or when we still had AMCEN, you could have done things through AMCEN. There is a chance through ARUA we might be able to do that, but we've had our funding cut back a bit. But I think there are ways around that, and maybe do some joint supervision and try and do it round there. But it's a huge problem at the moment. Some funding we were getting from the UK has been cut back, which is a real pain, basically because COVID has really messed us all up. But yeah, there might be ways of doing it. The other way is to try and get, if you cannot get industry to try and support it, but try and talk to people within the university as well. And then are supervisors bothered by the fact that engineering certificates and transcripts do not mention the degrees they supervise students for? I don't know how to get around that. Not really, no. I know the person who's asking that question, he had a bit of a problem, and I think we got round it. It's just the way the university does things. Now, if the student or ex-student then has to sort of prove that they did their research in this topic, normally that can be picked up by the faculty registrar or the supervisor itself. So it is a pain. I mean, I know it's nice to have a certificate which says metallurgy and materials, if that's what you did, or mechanical engineering, but you can get around it. I think the way why WITS does it, it's some old-fashioned thing dating from way back when, and they probably didn't think that people it would be necessarily to put the subject, but there's people talking to it, so it might not help you at the moment, but maybe in the future it will help. I think it's pretty silly, but yeah, that's all the questions I can find. And then Rodney, you've got your hand up.
Thank you very, very much, Prof. And thanks a lot, Desmond, for the platform. I just have to say, for those who are on this call, those that might not know, when Prof said that your work can be garbage and you have to do almost 10 versions of a paper, I think I've set the record at least 17 or 18 times.
No, I think I've had somebody to beat you.
Oh, that's good to know. But when it's done, it always comes out perfect. And I think that's just for any of the students who might be going through something similar. That harsh beginning, especially when you're putting your work together, when it goes out into the international domain, it's something you're always very, very proud of. So it's all about how you view it. And I also recognize some of our colleagues here as well, who were there from the time when we were students. So welcome. My questions, I've got two questions, Prof. The first one is still in relation to the topic you presented on. Over maybe you said the last 10 years, if you just use maybe 2010 to date, has there been a difference in engagement between supervisors and students? Is there something that has changed from your experience? Because we are on this other side, we just started to supervise about 5 years ago. And I just want to find out, has there been a change in engagement with students, or is it more or less the same from your take?
Oh, tricky. I think it's one of those things, it's different for different supervisors. There are some supervisors who seem to be less committed, okay? And I think there's some supervisors who really might not realize what they're getting into. But I think it's slowly getting better. One of the things which I think helped, and even when I did it, was doing the postgraduate diploma in higher education. I only did it a few years ago, and I would have loved to have done it earlier. And there was a module there on supervision, and I must admit that I I said quite a lot. I learned bits as well, but I also said bits, and everybody said, wow, you know, we didn't think of that. I think that's helped enormously, because there's been a big drive to get people to do that. And I think quite a lot of people have now done it, and it's helped enormously, because now people realize there's a common base as to what we were supposed to know, because there's literature out there that gets discussed on the course. And that's helped enormously, having this common base. Because before that, before it was formalized, it was really, you know, yeah, this is what I think I should be doing as a supervisor. And there were short courses on supervision, which were very good. So my take on it is, I think it is getting better. Yes.
Thank you so much. I think my second question is, again, in relation to COVID, and this becomes the new forum where supervisors and students can engage. In my short experience, it was a lot better when I'd have my students walk into my office and we could talk. We meet now more frequently than ever before because it's easier to do it electronically. However, it almost takes away from that engagement that one would easily have with their students. From your experience, has this created some form of a maybe negative spin, or is it positive? Maybe if you can give us feedback on that.
Oh, yeah. I think it's a bit of both. I've had two students. Well, they're both students afterwards, so they've graduated now, who I could finally get through what I wanted to tell them when we were writing up the papers. And I think that's because I've got better at doing it online, and we had to be online. And, you know, for both of them, I felt, wow, you know, this is a breakthrough. But for most of it, I think it's been worse, because I think you need that interaction. You need that interaction. It's a social thing. We're social animals. And no matter how much it's good to hear people's voices, and I'm getting really good at recognizing people's voices online, it's still good to have them sitting there, see the body language, smile at them, scowl at them. So I think it's to the detriment, really. But having said that, it's something at the moment we've just got to do, sadly. And I think we're all getting better at it. But I would love to go back to the time where I could sit in my office and people could just drift in and have a chat. And the other thing I'm missing is the sort of osmosis of meeting people in the corridor as I used to walk around campus, in the tea room, and hearing students chat. Because a lot of the stuff I used to pick up on how students are feeling, they didn't tell me that. I just used to pick it up, call it spying if you like, but just listening. And I don't get that anymore. I only get that by emails. So, yeah, it is worse. And I don't like it, but I'm afraid it's what we've got to put up with at the moment.
Thank you. Desmond, if you'll afford me one last one, and then I'll hand over. Your advice to a student who would just be joining varsity as a young Prof. Cornish, advice to a postgraduate student. What would be 2 or 3 things you'd like them to know about engaging with their supervisors? Anything just brief to a young student who's just coming in and is about to join vets to do their postgrad.
Okay. Take it that your supervisor is on your side. You might not think they are, because they trash your work, but the supervisor is on your side, and listen to your supervisor. They might not always be 100%, but they're going to be, they're going to be pretty high up % right. And then the other thing is, if you disagree with your supervisor, do it, you should both be doing it, supervisor and student. Okay, I know I use the word garbage, but I try not to use it too much. Try and do it with respect, because think about what you're doing as a research student. You are pushing the bubble of knowledge. So what the student is doing, nobody should have done before. They might have done it similar with the same piece of equipment. So that's why the supervisor might not be right, but the supervisor's had lots of practice. So, do disagree respectfully. And if you do disagree, tell your supervisor. So if your supervisor gives corrections, You know, tell them that you disagree with it and why. They might not be right. The supervisor probably is right, but they might not be. Or what more commonly happens is the student has written it in such a way that the supervisor doesn't understand it. And then you unpack it, and yeah, the student might be right, but they weren't writing it in that way. And the fourth thing, I know you said 2 or 3, the fourth thing is, if there's any changes in your circumstances, tell your supervisor. Yeah. You don't have to tell your supervisor embarrassing things, but you could say, you know, look, I'm not in a good time at the moment. I'm having a bit of difficulty. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much, Prof.
Thank
you very much.
Yeah, there's another one here. In my experience, what advice would you give to a supervisor who has to run after their students? Yeah, we're getting that more and more. Just keep trying. I'm afraid you have to. It's much more difficult these days than it used to be in the good old days before COVID, and I think everybody is finding everything difficult. So just keep trying. Email your student. I mean, especially with this online stuff, email your student. If you've got their phone number, phone them and just keep going. Sometimes I've had one student who literally absconded, which was really embarrassing because they were working as well and they absconded from work. But I've also had students that I've actually managed to bring back into the fold, even after almost giving up on them. You know, you sort of think, I'm fed up with this student. I'm fed up with chasing this student. I'll just try one more time. Well, actually, you try 10 more times, and eventually they do come back. Very rarely do you lose them totally. So I've had one that just gave up, and I'm not talking about the people who had problems and were up front and had to say, look, I've got too much work to do. I'm going to deregister. I'm talking about the people who fade away. I've had one earlier this year who I didn't think we were going to get back. He had all sorts of problems, but he submitted his masters, and and he did a pretty good job. So yeah. So you've just got to keep trying. Is it easy to change supervisors to someone who is more knowledgeable in your subject area? Ooh, that's a tricky one. When it's probably pretty difficult, okay? But if your supervisor has got any courage, any decency, and they realize that there's somebody there who's got better experience in that subject area, they should get them on as a co-supervisor. I've done that with my colleagues, where if it was totally out of my ambit and in the other potential supervisor's ambit, I would have said up front, you really ought to go to that supervisor. But if it's something that sort of sits 50-50 and I can still give some input, I would say, okay, let's see if we can get that person aboard as a co-supervisor. And that's worked really nicely, because there's my bit that I've got expertise in, and then there's the other person's bit of expertise. The student has 2 co-supervisors, and they actually win because they have 2 different people with 2 different experiences and expertises looking after their work. So that's the way I've done it. And quite often I have co-supervisors. And that's because I know that in a certain part they've got a better expertise. So it's tricky, because if the student's already there and the supervisor is, they might not feel like sharing because they might not feel strong enough to share. And I'm not sure how you could get out of that. But hopefully the supervisor would realize and say, okay, let's get a co-supervisor in. What you could do if you feel that you're not being supervised fairly because there's somebody there who's got better expertise, is talk to the head of school and they might be able to sort it out. And go through that thing of talk to the head of school. I mean, basically try to talk to the supervisor first, and you could couch it in such a way, don't you think it might be a nice idea if we get so-and-so involved? And, you know, if you do it nicely and politely, you don't say, well, to your supervisor, you're a total idiot, I've got no confidence in you, I want this one. Do it nicely and say, don't you think it might be a good idea if we get X in it, because they've got experience in that? And that would be a nice way for the supervisor to think, oh yeah, and not lose face.
Thank you so much, Prof. And I like what you said. Remember that Muppet that you thought did the
yeah, I was
and probably had supervised some people. And I think that one of the things that we should seriously take away is that the supervisor student, it's a relationship, the small r. And it is very, very important that we talk to the problem and not talk about it and run around it. It is very important that we do this. And I think that this is also an opportunity for us to reassess ourselves, analyze the situation, and see what are the steps ahead. On this platform, we always try to make knowledge go viral. That is one of the things that we are trying to champion at the ADU, especially the postgraduate division. So on this note, I want to thank you all for coming, and a special thank you to Prof. Cornish, my supervisor, and she will always be. Thank you so much. And I know a lot of us on this platform, we have one professor in common, and that is Prof. Cornish. And we thank you all for coming. Prof, once again, thank you. And if you remember what Prof had said, he said, talk to your supervisor. And she's repeated it like over 3 or 4 times. It is very important when you disagree to agree. But at the end of the day, talk to your supervisor. Find common ground. And especially if that supervisor is the person bringing in the money, then it is very, very important that you talk to your supervisor. So I thank you all for coming. And I know there are a lot of academics here, young academics, people we have learned. They said, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with people. And I think that we've learned a lot of things, and that these are some of the things that will take us, those of us aspiring to become academics. We've learned from a seasoned one. I think Prof has been in this area for over 30 years, if I'm not mistaken. And so we have a lot of knowledge to actually glean from the things she shared with us. On this note, I want to thank you all for coming, and then we'll see you next week. Next week, we'll be doing something very special, something very different. So I will entreat you to join us if you have the opportunity. On this note, thank you all for coming. And this particular meeting is adjourned. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, Prof. Bye.